Well, a warm welcome to this talk, and it's really quite interesting and a little confusing. Now, Fort Detrick, the United States biological research facility, well, we know it was closed down in August 19, and parts of it closed down for 8 months after that, just before, interestingly, the pandemic started. And we know that the bioscience part of it has just been closed down again. We've also looked last week at a publication from the White House, this publication here, saying quite clearly that the lab arose in China, unequivocally. But in this video, we're going to be looking at information from China saying that they have strong evidence that the virus arose in the United States. How credible is this? Is it possible that the virus arose from a biological warfare program, study program, I don't know, in Fort Detrick? Now, if you haven't got time to watch this video, I don't think it did. But the story is interesting, so if you've got time, stick around because it is quite interesting. Now, this is what we looked at recently, the lab leak. So here we see Wuhan is home of China's foremost SARS research lab, which of course it is, which has a history of conducting gain-of-function research, gene altering an organism supercharging is how it's put, and inadequate biosafety, and we know those things are true. Wuhan Institute of Virology researchers were sick with COVID-like symptoms in the fall of 2019. Interesting. And quite convincingly, they have the picture of how close the Hunan seafood market is to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a distance of just 7.5 miles. So that looks pretty convincing. Now, I'm going to be looking at the Chinese paper in quite a bit of detail in a minute. This is it here. And you get the impression that the Chinese have just released this to keep up with the American publication. And it does make some interesting points. Now, it's written in a style which is very, as you would expect, pro-Chinese style, but very readable. I'll give you some of the points in a minute. Now, first of all, let's look at this latest shutdown in the United States. And is this something we should be concerned about? Well, yes, I believe it really is something we should be concerned about. So let's get into the detail of that. White House lab leak publication is that one. Now, let's go on. This is based mostly from an article in the Daily Telegraph in the UK. Now, it's the Integrated Research Facility in Fort Detrick, Maryland. That's the correct name. And this is a bio-level BSL4 biosafety level 4 lab. This is the very secure lab. These are the labs that can deal with the most dangerous types of pathogen. Viruses, if they escape, could kill half of humanity or more potentially. We don't know what's in these labs, although we suspect. Now, it's easy to criticise these sort of programs, but you've got to remember that there is the potential for fighting disease, although that's probably smaller than it's hyped up to be. But if we didn't have biological research, well, we can be assured that the bad guys do have it. So it's a bit of an arms race situation. So I do actually think we need viral biological research in the United Kingdom, in the United States, because the bad guys are doing it as well, but there are caveats which we'll come on to. Let's carry on. High security lab at Fort Detrick, linked by the Chinese propagandists to the outbreak of COVID-19 without evidence, according to this article. I'll basically accept that with a small qualification, as we're going to see. US research facility that studies SARS coronavirus 2. So it does study the virus which led to the pandemic, which of course is rather interesting. Ebola, which you don't want, Lassa fever, which you don't want, Marburg virus, which you don't want, and Eastern equine encephalitis. These are described as high consequence disease. So these seem to be the programs that's currently being shut down. So this has been shut down by the Trump administration amid safety concerns. We'll see there's a debate around this in a minute. Basically, there's a debate around everything to do with this. So I'm just giving you information. You'll make up your own mind. I'm not going to try and prejudice you in that direction. National Institutes of Health has implemented a research pause, so-called, a safety stand-down. Told by email to stop all work, all experiments by 5 p.m. on the 29th of April. Identification of documentation of personnel issues involving contract staff that compromise the facility's safety culture. Now, I must say, contract staff, I don't know what it's like in the United States, but it's all the rage in the UK. And it might be easier to get someone who's only there to make a few dollars for a few weeks, who isn't quite of the same calibre, or even works for another vested interest. Who knows? We don't know more details than that, I'm afraid. China released a paper, substantial evidence suggesting the COVID-19 might have emerged in the United States earlier than officially claimed and earlier than the outbreak in China. And they do give some evidence for this, although I don't think it is conclusive. I think actually the virus escaped from China earlier than we think. But strange that, when the virus was just starting to think about coming along, or was along according to this Chinese paper, Fort Detrick closes down. Coincidence? Now, this closure by the NIH of the Fort Detrick labs, Professor Stuart Neal, head of infectious diseases at King's College London, says this: a sustained attack on collaborative US biomedical science and public health are already destroying disease surveillance systems and game-changing clinical trials that will result in avoidable deaths and morbidities for the years to come in some of the poorest countries, is the counter-argument. He goes on, there's willful vandalism of research and treatment programs that have taken years to establish, things that you could legitimately say made America great. So that is from a well-known professor in the United Kingdom. And now I don't know where Professor Neal gets his data from on the dangers. It's clear in his mind, it would appear, that there's a lot of deleterious consequences of closing this down. But to know how accurate that is, you need to know what the risk is as well. So how he knows what the level of risk is, I don't know. He's probably got mates who work there. I simply don't know. I really don't know. But it's a risk-benefit analysis, and quite how he knows that, I'm not sure. Anyway, Professor Francis Collins, also well known in the States, led the NIH for 12 years, some of which was under controversial circumstances. He says this: as a result of the Fort Detrick shutdown, more children and adults in low-income countries will now lose their lives because of research that didn't get done. Now, as I said, there is a valid argument here, because infectious diseases are a huge problem, especially in poorer countries. I've seen people die of infectious diseases in poor countries. It's a tragic situation. But maybe there's other ways to improve health that aren't being done, that people don't seem to be whinging about as much. What about improving water supply? What about giving out mosquito nets to prevent the transmission of malaria? What about making basic medication available? What about making basic healthcare available? And we could give children, what's it called? There's that stuff we give kids that's really good for them. We could make sure they have enough of it. What's it called? Oh, that's it. Food. We could make sure all children have adequate nutrition. And that might make a lot more difference than this high-powered, somewhat, you could argue, somewhat niche research. In my view, all those things I mentioned should be done. They can be done. Anyway, let's go on. We'll now look at the Chinese paper, which is really quite interesting. Now, here we see the State Council Information Office, the People's Republic of China. Now, it reads, I must say, it reads like it does come from the State Council of Information Office of China. But, you know, let's look at some of the points it makes. That's the link there. Download it for yourself. Evidence pointing to the US as the origin of COVID-19. And now this, of course, is according to the Chinese paper. What we're saying now is according to the Chinese paper. Numerous studies have shown that SARS coronavirus 2 originated outside China. Prior to the outbreak in Wuhan, multiple regions in the United States recorded positive SARS coronavirus 2 test results and other evidence of the virus. Interesting. Yes, it did, but maybe the data was released a little late from China. The US, must promptly respond to the legitimate concerns of the international community, well, we agree, proactively share with the WHO data on its early suspected cases. Here we don't agree. I don't think the World Health Organization is the right organization to do this. I'm hoping a better one is about to be set up. I don't know that, but I'm hoping that the American administration is going to have some way of improving international health. In fact, I'm sure there's plans for that. I don't think the WHO is the appropriate medium to do that for many reasons that we've talked about in previous videos. It just shows that WHO and China are quite matey, I think it shows that. Disclosure information about Fort Detrick. Always interesting, but of course it is a defence facility, so very limited as what can be released, I would have thought. Its global network of biological laboratories. Now here, we quite clearly see that the Chinese are saying there is a network of global biological laboratories, and it says it's. So the Chinese here are saying that Fort Detrick has a global network of biological laboratories. I couldn't possibly know if that's true or not. And the so-called research conducted therein and provide a responsible account to the global public. You'll have your own views on that. So we see that there's bits about this that do seem to be raising legitimate concerns and questions. Other bits which are less likely to be accurate. But I'm just giving you both sides and you can make your own mind up. In fact, it's not a matter of saying, no, the Americans are right and the Chinese are wrong, or the Chinese are right and the Americans are wrong. It's more nuanced than that. There's points that the Chinese are stressing here that have some validity. There's points that they're stressing here that have less or no validity, in my view. But let's carry on. Between 2016 and 2013, the Chinese point out US reported at least 1,500 serious laboratory incidents involving SARS, MERS, Ebola, anthrax, smallpox and avian influenza, all bad. No reason to assume that they're making that up. China prioritised lives and health above all else and implemented comprehensive, science-based and effective containment measures. Now, that's certainly true. The containment measures in China were extreme, draconian and long-lived. And really, they only stopped when people were paying incentives to others for exemption certificates, according to one account. But it went on for a long, long time. Was it effective? Yes, it was. Was it intolerable and unacceptable? Yes, it was, in my view. And to expose the mismanaged pandemic response in the United States. Now, again, was the pandemic response in the United States mismanaged? Well, yeah, I think it was. And it was in my country. Having said that, the points that are made in this paper of mismanagement are perhaps not the same ones that we would think are mismanagement. But the principle is true. There was mismanagement, and it's good to point that out. Not many other people, now more people are doing that now, to be fair, especially in the United States, where you have much more freedom of speech, I believe, than we do in the United Kingdom. Now, this is one of the headings here, contributing Chinese wisdom to the study of the origins of SARS coronavirus 2. To date, no findings have contradicted the conclusions of the joint WHO-China summary. It's fair to say that the study on the origins of SARS coronavirus 2 conducted in China has ended. Now, we could certainly argue with that. The collaboration between China and the WHO was questionable in many ways and came remarkably late. But, interesting here, the Chinese are saying it's fair to say that the study on the origin of SARS coronavirus 2 conducted in China has ended. As far as they're concerned, finished. We can't expect any more data from the Chinese. So the definitive evidence for the origin of the virus will probably never come to light because of the Chinese consider this to be closed. Others might call that censorship. I guess the Chinese would call it closure. China's open and transparent updates on its findings regarding the origins of the virus. Well, again, this is what the Chinese are saying. Perhaps they emphasise their point there. But here, China conducted systematic testing on more than 80,000 samples collected from bats, pangolins, wild birds, wild boars, raccoon dogs and other wildlife, as well as livestock and poultry across the country. I have no reason to assume this isn't true. 80,000 samples looking for the wild form of the virus. 2017 to 2021, analysis detected no evidence of SARS coronavirus 2 circulation in these animal populations. So it looks like the Chinese have done very thorough studies into the possibility of a naturally occurring virus and found nothing. Now, if they had found anything, I think we can assume that they'd be publishing it pretty quickly because it would take all of the heat away from any Wuhan lab leak thinking. If they showed, no, this is the natural cause, but they haven't been able to show that. You can't prove a negative, but it's looking very likely that this virus does not have a natural zoonotic spillover cause, as is suggested in this paper. So that is in my mind, that is a scientific problem. And we've looked at other reasons that suggest the lab leak as the most plausible, the Wuhan lab leak as the most plausible explanation. But having said that, we're still talking about the Fort Detrick potential lab leak. They say this through systematic epidemiological investigations, molecular tracing, animal host screening and studies on cold chain transmission. The possibility of Wuhan being the natural origin of SARS coronavirus 2 was scientifically ruled out. So the Chinese are saying it's impossible that the virus arose in China. Now, this all sounds good. This is sophistry in my view. It sounds all good and sort of scientific-y, but I think the conclusion is inaccurate. But this is the claim the Chinese are making. The possibility of Wuhan being the natural origin of the SARS coronavirus 2 was scientifically ruled out. Other headings in this paper: sharing information without reservation. They say assisting in the global fight against COVID-19 with all resources available. Well, that's what's the heading they have. The mismanaged response of the United States to the COVID-19 pandemic. The shifting blame for the ineffective US pandemic response. The US has made China the primary scapegoat for its own mismanaged COVID-19 response. You see, there's truth here. The US did mismanage the COVID-19 response. But I think probably everywhere in the world did. In fact, everywhere in the world did. You could argue that Sweden got it roughly right. But that's what the Chinese are saying in this paper. The US has made the WHO another target of blame. I think that's got some justification. Tell me what you think. On January 29, 2020, following his visit to China, the WHO director general commended China's efforts and transparency at a press conference in Geneva. So WHO saying China's great, China saying the WHO is great. No need for me to say more. In April 2020, again this is in the Chinese paper, Anthony Fauci, an eminent infectious diseases expert. So the Chinese are saying Anthony Fauci, an eminent infectious diseases expert, and members of the White House coronavirus task force, and then they're going to make another point. But the point is here, they're calling Anthony Fauci an eminent infectious diseases expert. I don't think I need to spend the next 10 minutes drawing question marks around that. You get the point. Now, just some evidence about the 2019 leak. Now, I'll just show you quickly the papers that these come from, so you know we're not making this up. That's one there. I've given all the references for these. That's the Independent, but it's got a thingy on it. We'll skip it. Oh, there we go. Research into deadly viruses and biological weapons at the US Army lab shut down fears over they could escape. 2019. and again from the Telegraph. So plenty of evidence that this is accurate. We'll just look at this briefly, then we'll finish. So these are the articles I've just looked at. Now, Fort Detrick, 2019, ceased desist order from the CDC came in 2019. That is that one. Now, it shut down, I think it was about the 8th of August 2019, near the start of August 2019. Partial reopening was August, September, October, November. 3 months later, partial reopening, so it was completely closed for 3 months and not fully opened again for 8 months till March 2020. So it sounds quite serious if they had to shut the whole facility down in August 19, completely for 3 months and partly for 8 months. And just a little more evidence for that. These are the papers that we looked at with their references. Fort Detrick researchers banned from working with anthrax, Ebola and smallpox until procedures improve, and they also work with plague. This is the bacterium Yersinia pestis, ricin, which is a pretty poisonous substance. The final article there from the Telegraph, germ lab creating vaccines for deadly microbes, shut down over safety concerns, or they admit to creating vaccines. What else they do, I don't know. Research at the US Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick. That's the shutdown. So there we go. Chinese saying that the virus did definitely not come from China. Good evidence that it came from the United States, according to the Chinese. Unequivocal that it came from China, according to the US site. And of course, in my mind, there's no question it came from China. But interesting circumstantial evidence about early cases of SARS coronavirus 2 in the United States, which do merit epidemiological investigation. So there you go. That's I guess you would call this video an analysis, the argument. But we'll leave it there. Make up your own mind. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.